Imagine a letter arrives at your door, but it's not from a friend. It's not from a utility company. It's a message from someone who says they can see everything. Your secrets, your compromises, the things you do when no one is watching. And this message contains specific instructions. It tells you exactly how much time you have left before a reckoning. It doesn't use names, but it points to where you are, and it describes exactly what's going wrong in your city. Now, imagine this letter wasn't sent to an individual, but to entire global movements. And imagine that its timeline didn't just cover weeks or years, but centuries of human history. This is the central, unsettling premise that historians and theologians have found in the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. 7 specific letters, written nearly 2,000 years ago, weren't just for 7 ancient churches. These letters outline a terrifyingly accurate timeline of the rise and fall of whole empires within the context of the church, the shift of power across continents, and a progression that leads directly to where we are right now. But if this timeline is real, it begs a question that we have to ask. How did ancient texts manage to predict centuries of historical events? And more importantly, what happens when the timeline runs out? The prophet Daniel was shown the great sweep of history, the rise and fall of empires, the march of kingdoms, and the unfolding path that leads to the end of the age. But centuries later, another man received a different kind of timeline. On the remote island of Patmos, the Apostle John was given a vision, not primarily of political empires, but of the spiritual history of the church itself. A map of the church through time. And not everyone agrees this is how Revelation works. There are scholars who read these letters as only historical, but what's undeniable is how precisely these characteristics match what followed. Today, we're looking at the 7 churches of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, mentioned in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Now, traditionally, Revelation chapters 2 to 3 are read as real letters to real churches facing real problems in the 1st century AD. And that is absolutely true. But for centuries, theologians have noticed a pattern. The characteristics of these churches, the specific challenges they faced, and the warnings they received seem to align eerily with major eras of subsequent history. The order in which they appear isn't random. It traces a chronological path. This is often called the prophetic timeline of church history. These 7 letters provide a prophetic blueprint for the entire span of Western and eventually global civilization leading to the apocalypse. So, how does it work? The timeline kicks off in the 1st century with the letter to Ephesus. Jesus praised Ephesus for its hard work and perseverance. It's an energetic, passionate church. This perfectly mirrors the first era, the apostolic age, the explosion of early Christianity fueled by the direct followers of Jesus. But even here, there's a warning. Jesus says they have forsaken their first love. That's Revelation chapter 2, verses 1. In other words, they had truth without warmth, correct belief, but fading devotion. This warning still echoes today. A church can be theologically precise and yet slowly lose its love for God and people. Historically, this pointed to the initial fervor of the first generation, starting to fade as institutionalization began. But things get darker with the next stop, Smyrna. The message to Smyrna is one of intense suffering. Jesus told them that some will be thrown into prison and tested for 10 days. Revelation 2:10. Historians align this with the brutal, state-sponsored Roman persecution of Christians. From Nero to Diocletian, this was an era of intense testing, and the phrase 10 days is often linked to the 10 distinct waves of major Roman persecution. This church received no rebuke, only encouragement. Suffering purified their faith. Throughout history, some of the strongest churches have been the ones that had the least comfort. But this forces us to ask another question. If the persecution was foretold, does that mean the next phase, the moment power finally shifts, was predicted too? And that is exactly what happens next with Pergamum. This letter mentions the church dwelling where Satan has his throne and criticizes them for compromising with the teachings of Balaam. Historically, this aligns perfectly with the momentous shift under Emperor Constantine. In 313 AD, with the Edict of Milan, persecution ended. But something else began. Compromise. The church, once on the run, now became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Power, money, and political influence flooded in. The warning here isn't about persecution from the outside, but corruption from within. If this timeline is hitting different, hit subscribe, notification, and like before we get to the part that's going to shake you, because what comes next is the era most people don't want to talk about: Thyatira. This letter is the longest and contains the strongest warnings. It accuses the church of tolerating a woman named Jezebel, who leads people into immorality and idolatry. This historical era matches the 1,000-year period of the Middle Ages. Power consolidated in the papacy. While great works of faith continued, this was also the era of institutional corruption, indulgences, and the dominance of a single, powerful religious hierarchy over both spiritual and political life in Europe. False teaching multiplied inside the church, and spiritual corruption was tolerated instead of confronted. The Jezebel figure is often interpreted symbolically as this corrupting, dominant system. This brings us to a major historical pivot point. After 1,000 years, a breaking point was inevitable. Was that predicted too? That pivot is Sardis. Jesus delivered to the church of Sardis a cutting observation. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 1, he says, "You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead." Later, he notes that there are a few names who have not soiled their clothes. This matches the dawn of the Protestant Reformation, which started in 1517. It was a time of massive revolution, focusing on a return to Scripture. Martin Luther, the catalyst of the Protestant movement, had roundly condemned the sale of indulgences and the moral rot that had proliferated within the Roman Catholic Church. This was the time when the great doctrines of the faith that had been buried for centuries were revived, and a fresh vitality of faith was in the air. But the Reformation that was supposed to clean house also created hundreds of new denominations. Alive but dead in a different way. And in many places, the initial spiritual power was lost, and faith became formal, cultural, and routine. The movement became tied up in the formation of state churches and political alliances in Europe. It was alive with new doctrine, but stalled out spiritually. But what follows is a complete change in tone. We arrive at Philadelphia. To Philadelphia, there is no criticism, only praise. Jesus, the Lord of his church, speaks of an open door that no one can shut, and commends their faithfulness despite their small strength. This beautifully illustrates the explosion of dynamic evangelical movements that began in the 18th century. Think of the Great Awakenings in America, the Wesleys in England, and the rise of massive global mission societies that took the Christian message around the world. For the first time, a globally connected, spiritually passionate, non-state church movement emerged. This era of global expansion brings us to the final and most unsettling stop on the timeline.
If you are enjoying this video, subscribe, hit the like button, and the notification too, so as not to miss another episode.
The final letter is to Laodicea. This is the era of the success gospel. A wave of prosperity, dominion, consumerist-driven gospels sweeping from the West to Africa, Asia, and the global South.
I need you to lift those hands and declare victory over your situation. The breakthrough is here if you just believe it right now.
We are the wealthiest, most technologically advanced generation to ever live. Yet, spiritually, we've become comfortably numb. We have everything we want, so we feel we need nothing from God. I am rich. I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing. But there is one haunting detail in this letter that changes everything. Despite all the massive events, the anointed music, and the crowded sanctuaries, Jesus is pictured standing outside the door, knocking to get in. It's the ultimate irony. He isn't in the room. He hasn't abandoned the church. The church has simply become so self-satisfied that it doesn't even realize he's gone. The Laodicean church is the last church before the beginning of the apocalypse, the tribulation period. We return to our first question. How could an ancient text predict this? The prophetic timeline is compelling precisely because it takes something ancient and makes it relevant to all of us. It turns a list of 7 obscure ancient towns into a mirror for centuries of human nature. And if the theory is correct, we are currently standing in the final chapter before the apocalypse. What happens when the timeline runs out? In the book of Revelation, this last church age, Laodicea, doesn't end with a whimper or a slow decline. It ends with the return of the one standing at the door. The letter isn't for an ancient city anymore. According to this timeline, the message is for us. He's knocking. And here is the most important part. Even in the era of Laodicea, this era of spiritual lukewarmness and noise, the letter doesn't end with a condemnation of the world. It ends with an invitation to the individual. The remnant isn't a special club for the elite. It's simply the group of people who choose to hear the knock. If you feel that spiritual numbness we talked about, if you're tired of a faith that feels like a consumer product rather than a relationship, then the knock you're hearing isn't an alarm. It's an invitation. So the first thing you need to do is open that door. Being part of the remnant starts with a simple, quiet act of the will. It's telling Christ, I recognize I've been trying to be rich on my own. I admit my spiritual poverty. Come in, take the lead. It's not about joining a movement. It's about restoring the first love we saw back in Ephesus. Secondly, in the letter to Laodicea, Jesus tells them to buy gold refined in the fire. That gold is faith tested by trials and intimacy with Him. Today, I want to challenge you. Don't just skip to another video. Spend 5 minutes in silence after this ends. Read Revelation chapter 3, verses 14 through 22. Let the words sit with you. Thirdly, friends, amidst the noise of our world, there is a steady and beautiful truth. Christ is coming back. This isn't a reason for fear, but our greatest source of hope. In an age of distraction, I invite you to be the remnant, those few who choose to stay awake and stay close to the shepherd. I encourage you to gently revive the holy rhythms that sustain the soul. Find a quiet corner to sit with your Bible daily for just 15 minutes. Seek out the warmth of a Christian community where you can truly do life together. And give Him just 5 minutes of your day in prayer, away from the rush. He isn't looking for perfection. He is simply standing at the door. Will you choose to open it today? If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below with the word remnant. It's a signal to us and to others that you're choosing to stay awake in a sleeping age.